So we always have doubts about the things that we can achieve, and Heather's belief is that sometimes we should cast those doubts aside and just give her. We all embrace challenges, and the way we embrace those, if we kind of welcome them or see them as obstacles, impacts how our ability to be successful. Heather's a 3-sport national athlete and a 2-time gold Olympian. So Heather has a gold medal in rugby and in bobsleigh. Pretty impressive. She also holds a master's in occupational therapy. And she'll explain how the qualities and characteristics that it takes to be a successful athlete are the same qualities that it takes to be successful in really anything in your life. Her incredible record of excellence has afforded her astounding perceptiveness and an understanding that she conveys through her engaging presentation. I spent an hour on the phone with Heather. I really wanted to be friends with her. I don't want to play tennis with her. Maybe a coffee. With powerful insight and personal anecdotes of overcoming her own obstacles on her route to the Olympic podium and to the gold medal portion of that podium. She's going to share that with us. I'd like you to direct your attention to the screens.
For those of you who choose to embrace challenges, you will see opportunities instead of obstacles. Step outside of your comfort zone, take a risk. We are all capable of way more than we give ourselves credit for. Because although a goal may seem too big and the outcome may seem highly unlikely, please just believe me when I say it is still without a doubt very much possible.
Welcoming Heather Moyse to the stage.
Woo. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Wow, that was very enthusiastic. I do realize it's 8:30. I do realize. Good morning, everybody. Yes, better, amazing. I do have to say that when I looked at the schedule, I was a little bit concerned to be following hidradenitis suppurativa. I thought our content might overlap a little bit. It took me a long time to learn that word, by the way. Just the other day, I was speaking at an event, and a gentleman approached me afterwards, and he was talking about how he just admires Olympians so much. So he was talking about how he's always impressed about how they're so driven and determined and diligent and unwavering in their drive to achieve their goals. And his question for me was very interesting. His question for me was, had I ever had a day when I just didn't feel like training? Now, I'm sure none of you have ever had a day where you didn't want to go to work. So that's fine, I won't accuse you of anything, but for me, I was actually almost embarrassed to think about the number of times when I didn't want to go to the gym. So instead of saying that, I just told him about the time when I was in PEI, in Prince Edward Island, visiting my family. It was the summer of 2009, so the summer right before the Vancouver Olympics in 2010. And I was exactly as he had described. I was determined, I was diligent, I was unwavering in my training. I only took days off when they were on the schedule for recovery. But there was one particular day when I just did not want to go. I just wanted to have a normal, lazy summer day. But champions don't sit at home. So I went anyway. I got myself out of the house, drove myself to the gym, walked up the stairs, reached for the door handle, and found it was locked. And there was a sign on the door that said, closed for the holidays. I swear, I spun around so fast with the biggest smile on my face. I walked to the car with a newly found bounce in my step. I sung most definitely the wrong lyrics to whatever song was playing on the radio the whole way home. Walked into the house, kicked off my shoes, went into the family room, flopped down onto the couch, picked up the remote control, and just as I was about to sink into that sweet spot, you know the spot, you know the binge-watching Netflix spot, like you're just getting so comfortable you could stay for the weekend, I was just getting there when all of a sudden a vision popped in my head. And all I could see was the girl who was fighting for my spot. So I got up off the couch, walked to the back hallway, put on my shoes, and was just heading out the door when Mom came around the corner and she said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I've got to go do a workout." "Well, I thought you said the gym was closed." "Oh, it is, but I'm going to head up the street to the school." "Well, Heather, if the gym is closed, the school is definitely going to be closed." "Well, I know, but I've got to find something." I did my entire upper body workout on the playground equipment outside of that school. Now, it was definitely not the same workout I would have done had I been in an actual gym. But I did something. The point was, I did something. I left that playground just knowing that I was doing everything I could in pursuit of my goal, that I just had to get a little bit creative. But I also left that playground realizing that excuses really are everywhere, and that we really are all capable of way more than we give ourselves credit for. So that got me thinking, what stops us? What stops us from reaching our potential? Where do those excuses come from? What stops us from achieving, sometimes even pursuing, the things that we really want? Well, during another visit home to PEI, this time in the summer of 2016, I was at my parents' house. We were about to have dinner, and Mom walked into the room and she said, "I forgot to tell you, your father and I added something else to our bucket list." I was a little surprised. I didn't know they had a bucket list. But I was curious, so I said, "Well, what is it?" "Your father and I have decided that someday we are going to ring in the new year doing ballroom dancing in the Imperial Palace in Vienna." Okay, that's a legit bucket list goal, just in case you want to know. That's legit. So I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Are you going to do it this year?" "Well, no, we can't do it this year." "Why? What else what are you doing this year for New Year's Eve?" "Oh, well, nothing, but we can't do it this year." "Well, if you're not doing anything, why can't you do it this year?" "Oh, it's too late. It's probably sold out." "Mom, it's July." "I know, Heather, but it's a really big deal. It's like there are famous people who go, celebrities and sometimes royalty, and it's televised. It's a really big deal." "But are you sure it's sold out?" So I got on my laptop, and it took me probably 5 minutes to find exactly what she was talking about, the exact event, and also to discover that not only were there still tickets available, but she could in fact choose which room she and Dad could have their pre-dancing meal in. So I looked up from my laptop and I said, "Well, there are tickets here. Do you want me to just book them?" She looked a little scared, a little nervous. And she hesitantly looked at me and she said, "It would be a lot more fun if we went with another couple." Well, I was single at the time, so it wasn't going to be me. So I suggested my Aunt Roberta and Uncle Alex, with whom my parents had traveled to Germany the year before. So Mom said, "Well, they would be perfect. They would be ideal. They would be so much fun. But they're not going to be able to go this year." "Why? What are they doing this year?" "Well, they're doing their big trip across the Northern Passage this year." "They're doing that over the Christmas holidays?" "Oh, no, they're doing that in September. But they're not going to want to take 2 big trips in 1 year." "Are you sure?" So she said, "Well, you call your aunt then." I was like, "Okay." So I got on my phone, called my Aunt Roberta, explained the whole situation, this whole bucket list trip, and how it was, highly unlikely that it would happen or that they could go, but I just thought I would try anyway. She didn't say a word the whole time I spoke. At the very end, she just said, Well, I would have to run it by your uncle. She very politely said that. Tell your mother I'll get back to her. So I was like, okay. I hung up the phone. There was nothing more I could do. So we sat down to eat our meal, and probably 10 minutes into dinner, the phone rings. My dad answers it. He passes the phone to my mother, who then squeals with delight and says, "Are you serious?" My parents and my Aunt Roberta and Uncle Alex danced their way into 2017 in the Imperial Palace in Vienna. So again, I ask, what's stopping us? I was so intrigued by this question that I actually started looking into it a little bit more, started doing a bit of research. I actually included a whole section about this in my book, Redefining Realistic. And what I found was that assumptions, what we just heard about, if you actually think about it, that's definitely one. We assume way too many things. I'm not going to ask her out because I'm sure she'll say no. I'm not going to apply for that position because I'm sure that there are more qualified people trying out. Self-limiting beliefs, that's another one. What about just plain fear? Fear of the unknown, fear of standing out, fear of failure. But actually, it's not actually the fear of failure. It's not failure that we fear. Failure is kind of a moot point. It's actually what we assume failure will bring. That's what we fear. Isolation, ridicule, judgment. That's what we fear. Let me share with you a fundamental truth. I would never have discovered that I was capable of winning 2 Olympic gold medals had I personally not overcome the anxiety that was brought on just by the thought of wearing full spandex in front of millions of people. Now, that may not seem like a big deal to you, but for me, it was almost a deal breaker. I mean, think about it. The thinnest of material suction to your body with nothing underneath except underwear and a burn vest in case you crash. Yeah, I grew up when it was trendy to wear your dad's baggiest sweaters to school. Anybody else? Yes, baggy? Yes, okay, absolutely. So the idea, the thought of wearing a speed suit in public was as uncomfortable as, well, let's just say I felt exposed. But I've since realized that that is exactly how you need to feel. That is exactly what needs to happen for you to take things to the next level, for you to reach the next level of success, for you to overcome the obstacles, both the real obstacles that you can kind of tangibly see, but also the ones that we create for ourselves in our minds, the things that stop us from moving forward, whether it's in sports, in our work life, or just in our home life. Sometimes you have to be willing to step outside of your comfort zone, because if you don't, you'll never discover what you're truly capable of. And if you want to experience change and get big results, you have to be willing to feel uncomfortable and maybe even a little bit exposed. After I finish speaking today, I hope you leave with a slight shift in perspective. Just a new way of looking at problems and setbacks, a new way of looking at the unknown. I hope you leave starting to recognize some of your own personal underlying fears, and also starting to challenge your assumptions about what you currently believe to be impossible. And also maybe a little bit excited about venturing beyond the boundaries of your comfort zone to discover for yourself what you are truly capable of. Because in my case, when I embraced discomfort, it resulted in these. Now, these are my 2 Olympic medals for bobsledding. The one on the left is the one from Vancouver, and the one on the right with the glass cutout in it, that one's from Sochi in 2014. Now, I do have them here, don't worry. I didn't forget them. I have them here. I just put them up there so you can see them a little bit easier. But I do want to say that you'll be able to see them even easier afterwards. My favorite time of doing events is afterwards, when I get to connect with everybody. So you can come. I'm at the Cape booth in the C3, I believe, exhibition hall. I look forward to connecting with you. You can try them on. You can take your selfies, because I know you want to. I also have books. If people know of anyone who's going through a transition or a difficult time or moving on to something positive and you believe in them, I can personalize a book for you. I can also answer any questions that you have. This isn't a Q&A up here. Sometimes I just do Q&As. But I would love, it's my favorite time. I get to answer everyone's questions. But I'm just going to get one question off the table because it is the question I get asked most often. So I'm just going to answer that question right up here. And the question is, which medal is my favorite? Now, I'm sure right now you're kind of drifting toward, when you look at the pictures, you're kind of drifting towards one or the other. Like if I were to ask you right now, which one do you want to put on, I'm sure you would know right now which one you would want to put on, Vancouver or Sochi. Well, when people ask me that question, it's not really an easy question for me to answer. You see, the medal from Vancouver, that was the first medal we won in 2010. And we were underdogs going into those games, and we were on home soil. So to win when you're not expected to is one thing, but to win on home soil in front of your people, that was a feeling that can never be replicated. It's a feeling I've actually stopped trying to explain because I do believe that it truly goes beyond words. And then when we found ourselves in Sochi 4 years later, we were defending Olympic champions. We were trying to defend the Olympic gold medal from Vancouver. And to win under all of that pressure was also a pretty incredible feeling. So when I think about which one's my favorite, I find it very hard. And I don't really have a clear-cut favorite based on circumstance or results. But I do keep getting drawn back to the medal from Vancouver. Because the story behind these medals, the story is pretty incredible. The Royal Canadian Mint spent 2.5 years designing these medals. And they actually made history in 2 ways. The first way they made history is that it's not flat. It's actually not flat. It's wavy to reflect the topography of British Columbia, which is not flat. Second way they made history is that the design on the front of all 615 medals that were made for the Vancouver Games, the design on the front of each and every single one of them is different. Now, why they are different is even more incredible. The medals were designed so that when all 615 medals are brought together, they can all be slightly assembled, slightly overlap one another to make up one big, so they're different right there. That's even within my own team. But when all 615 medals are brought together, they can all slightly overlap one another to make up one big First Nations design. And my medal actually fits right there in that picture. Now, the reason behind this is the idea that every Olympic medalist is forever connected in some way, that we share something special, but that every single athlete has a completely different story, come from different countries, have different backgrounds, pursued different sports, have different support systems, have had to face different challenges and overcome different obstacles in order to get to that place. But that we were all connected because of something we were able to accomplish, a kind of a shared accomplishment. I just never thought I would be one of those athletes because I grew up in Prince Edward Island. There weren't people around me training to go to the Olympics, training to represent our country at some big upcoming event. To me, Olympians, they were TV people. They weren't everyday normal people like I considered myself to be. I also grew up in a very academic family, so even though I did play sports my whole life, it was just for fun. I mean, I just considered sport to be extracurricular to what I was going to do to earn a living. So I pursued a career and a master's degree in occupational therapy. I didn't actually start taking sports seriously and actually training for sports and lifting weights until I was 27 years old, at which time I was suddenly faced with the challenge of seeing if I could qualify for the national bobsled team and compete in the following Olympic Games, which were less than 5 months away. It was then when I realized I am motivated by challenges. Is it likely that someone with my background, starting a new sport at the age of 27 and never having lifted weights before, would eventually compete in 4 Olympic Games and win 2 Olympic gold medals? No. In fact, highly unlikely. But each of those 4 Olympic Games presented me with 4 very unique challenges. In Torino 2006, it was the challenge of learning something new. Could I learn a new sport? Could I learn to do it well? And could I learn to do it well in time to compete in those games in less than 5 months' time? Vancouver 2010, it was the unfinished business of placing 4th in Torino that kind of fueled and sparked the challenge of seeing if I could get on top of that Olympic podium and win a medal for my country. And then in Sochi 2014, it was not only the team challenge of seeing if we could successfully defend the Olympic gold medal we had won in Vancouver, but it was also the personal challenge of seeing if I could recover from hip surgery in order to get there in the first place. And then there's Pyeongchang 2018, and that's a whole different story. My body did not care about my reputation or my 2 Olympic medals. It was August 2017, only 6 months before the Pyeongchang Olympics, when I actually decided to return to bobsledding for that season. And at that point, I hadn't done any training since Sochi. That's 3.5 years of not training. And within that 3.5 years, I'd had a second hip surgery, one that I had mistakenly rehabbed like a normal person and not like a high-performance athlete who was expecting to put crazy amounts of force through her hip. Is it likely that someone, after having 2 hip surgeries and not having trained for 3.5 years, would come back in less than 6 months' time to compete in her 4th Olympic Games at the age of 39? No. In fact, highly unlikely. But facing challenges and choosing to embrace challenges on the road to achieving the goals that we want, it's not unique to my story. Every occupation or industry has its own unique challenges to face, and yours is no different. The challenges you face may be different from other industries, but everybody has challenges. You have to deal with shift work, not easy. And managing that shift work with a work-life balance, with your loved ones at home, figuring all that stuff out. And also just within the ER in general, we've got overcrowding. Overcrowding is a huge problem in the ER, but it's not necessarily caused because of issues in the ER, but overcrowding of hospitals and also long-term care facilities, and not being able to move the people from the ER to where they need to go. And then some of you may be dealing with personal challenges on the side. Physical limitations, just not enough time in the day or energy in the tank. For some of you, as much as you might be making diagnoses at work, you may be either newly diagnosed yourself or a new diagnosis in the family that is taking all of your energy and time into thinking about them and hard to focus on what your goals are. But regardless of how big they are or how they present themselves, facing challenges successfully means just knowing exactly what that goal is, what exactly you want to achieve. But being able to break that down into manageable pieces and focusing on the process. Over the years, I set bobsled push start records on bobsled tracks all over the world. And that's the first 50 meters of the track before gravity takes over. And I never stood at the starting line focused and thinking about getting a start record. I broke it down. I had to focus on the timing of falling into the sled and hitting off the starting block at the same time as my driver. Because if our timing was off, we just lost 1/100th of a second. Then I have to focus on the extension of my leg off the starting block, because if I don't fully extend, I've just lost another 100th of a second. And then I focus on the first three driving steps that fall onto the ice. Because depending on where they fall, I've just lost anywhere from 1 to 300ths of a second. If my steps are too far, I no longer have the power behind me. I've broken my stride. If they're too short, I've just done a stutter step and I'm not getting the amount of distance I could possibly get. And after those first 3 steps, I'm then focused on transitioning from a driving phase into more of a sprint phase as we crest over the hill. And then the last thing I'm focused on is still not a record. The last thing I'm focused on is the last 2 power steps that launch me off of the ice and into the sled, which then launches the sled into the track with the fastest velocity I can possibly give it. Do I want a start record? Yeah, of course I want a start record. But I don't focus on my desired outcome, but on the execution of every step that has to happen along the way in order for that desired outcome to become a reality. And that's the same thing when achieving any kind of goal. In January 2016, I summited the highest mountain in Antarctica to raise awareness for PTSD and also to raise money for our Canadian War veterans. And climbing that mountain was one of the most physically and mentally challenging things I have ever done, not to mention the coldest. That is my hair, by the way. I feel like I'm giving Gandalf a run for his money. But it was also one of the most literal of analogies in terms of setting a very large goal and having to focus on one step at a time. I mean, just like when pursuing any goal, when you climb a mountain, you can't let yourself get distracted from your path. You can't let your eyes or your mind wander away from the next step that needs to happen. Because if you do, one of 3 things will happen. 1, you will trip and you'll just make a mistake and trip and stumble. You may or may not get back up from that mistake. 2, you'll get sidetracked, stepping off the path into softer, deeper snow, taking a lot more time and energy. Depending on how far you veer off of your path, you may or may not find yourself back onto the path you wanted to be on. Or 3, you will step on the rope attaching you to the person in front of you, therefore halting him or her in their progress and decreasing the efficiency of the entire rope team. Now, you may never have to battle the wind or the cold to summit a mountain, but to overcome the challenges you face, you too need to know exactly where you want to be, where you want to end up, and be able to break that down into manageable pieces and focus on the things that are in your control. Focus on the process. And all of that takes perspective. Now, speaking about perspective, it was the fall of 2012 when I decided to return to bobsledding to compete in the Sochi Olympic Games in 2014. And at that time, in the fall of 2012, I actually hadn't done any running for a year and a half because of a serious ankle injury that I'd incurred playing in the Rugby World Cup the year before. So that fall, my training was very gradual. We were being very cautious. But despite how cautious we were being, about a month and a half into training that fall, I developed pain in my right hip. So because the Olympics were the following year, we got an MRI right away. And I sent the images to Dr. Bill Stanish, who was probably one of the best orthopedic surgeons at the time in the country, based right here in Halifax. Now, surgeons are trained to see something they can fix, and they're just going to want to fix it. But I sent them to Bill because I knew him personally from some charity events we had done together. So I wanted the whole picture taken into consideration. Just because there was something that needed to be fixed, I didn't want it to be fixed unless it would directly impact my ability to achieve my goal or not. So I sent the images to him. He called me about a week later and he said, "Heather, I just received your images. Do you want the good news or the bad news first?" In my head, I was like, sweet, there's good news. Obviously, if there's good news, it means I don't need surgery. So the bad news is probably just that it's going to be painful, maybe uncomfortable, that I'm going to need ongoing, really annoying therapy like every day. So I said, okay, well, hit me with the bad news first. So he said, well, the bad news is that you need surgery. Okay, well, if I need surgery, what on earth is the good news? Well, you definitely need surgery. So, Heather, the good news is that your hip looked so damaged that you don't have to worry about having to make a decision as to whether or not you need the surgery. Yeah, that's perspective. As a speaker, I have the privilege of working with and learning about groups all across the country before I speak at their events, and even outside the country now. And I've spoken to government departments and agricultural associations, software developers and educators, and it's been amazing. And what I've come to learn over the years is that the qualities it takes to be successful as an athlete are the same qualities it takes to be successful in any occupation or industry. Now, I'm not referring to the specific skills required to execute the job. I'm referring to the qualities, the traits, the characteristics, the qualities it takes to successfully manage change, face challenges, and overcome the obstacles that will inevitably pop up along the way. I cannot say with absolute certainty that you will overcome your challenges. But pursuing any dream or goal is not about the guarantees. It's about the possibilities. Because there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees in sport. There are no guarantees in business. There are no guarantees in the ER. And there are no guarantees in life. But believing in the possibilities allows us to challenge our preconceived boundaries, allows us to challenge the boundaries that society or history has set for us, and test not only the threshold of our potential, but the threshold of what is possible. Nobody thought it was possible to run the 4-minute mile until Roger Bannister did it in 1954. And then people suddenly started doing it all the time. Why? Because they suddenly discovered it was possible. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a big quotes person. So I love quotes because I feel like for me, they shift the way I can look at something. And so over the years, I kind of started developing my own, just things that were like just sayings that I was kind of creating that were helping me get through different points in my life. And one of them, which you might be familiar with, is believe in the possibilities. But another one was no regrets. I realized very early on in my bobsled career that I wanted to be able to stand at the starting line, at the top of the bobsled track, at the Winter Olympic Games, and just know that I had done everything that I could to be the best that I could be at that moment. Because that way I could be at peace with any result, just knowing that there was nothing more I could have done. So I developed this no regrets philosophy, which meant, how many of you have heard of athletes taking ice baths for recovery? Yes. How many of you have taken them yourselves? Oh my God, it's awful, isn't it? It's torture, is it not? Anybody? Yes, torture? Oh my goodness. Okay, for those of you who may not have heard of this self-inflicted torture, it is humans submerging themselves into bathtubs of water that's so cold that the ice you have also put in there is pretty much no longer melting. And this is to help with restriction and expansion, to help flush out lactic acid and to help you recover. That's what it's supposed to be for. And I did this somewhat voluntarily. I did this until a therapist told me that he thought that cold ice baths, that's a bit redundant, ice baths are not good for me. He said that unlike most athletes who were dealing with tight muscles, he believed I was dealing with tight fascia. So for the non-doctor, non-medical people in here, fascia is like a saran wrap casing that goes around your different muscle groups. And he believed that for me, that's what was really tight. So he suggested instead of ice baths, I take warm baths with Epsom salts in them. I mean, who am I to say no? So that's what I did. And so immediately I started following this regime. And this happened to be the season, the Sochi Olympic season. So 2 nights before every race we did that season, I had an Epsom salt bath. And every race we did that season, the results were great. We were right at the top. We were the fastest. So when something's working, you don't go and change it up at the big event. You don't suddenly show up at the Olympics and say, I think I'll try something new. So as soon as I got to the Sochi Olympics, I saw the schedule for our training and for race day. And I counted 2 squares before our first day of competition. And in that square, I wrote Epsom salt bath, just so nothing would get in the way. So I wouldn't accidentally book like a team meeting or a therapy session or a media interview, just so there'd be no problems. Well, problem. 2 nights before our first day of competition at the Sochi Olympic Games, I discovered that there were no bathtubs in the mountain village at the Sochi Olympic Games. Like anywhere. We couldn't find one in our entire building. I had some of the Canadian Olympic Committee staff members, checking in adjacent buildings. The medical personnel everybody was trying to help me find a bathtub. Couldn't find one. So, you of all people know that as much as you can plan, shit happens. Right? Something comes up. Something's bound to come up. So to be successful, you have to have perspective and strength of mind. So I knew that I would still be able to stand at that starting line, bath or no bath, and at least be able to know that I had done everything I could to be the best that I could be at that moment. But the thing is, we're really good at lying to ourselves, aren't we? I didn't want to have any kind of doubt in the back of my mind while I was standing at that starting line. So that meant literally doing everything that I could and turning over every single rock to be able to have that kind of confidence. So I may have had a bath in a recycling bin, but you know what? I was able to stand at that starting line with confidence, knowing that there was nothing else I could have done. Now, I do have to say that the medical staff cleaned that out for me. They sanitized that. Yeah. See, there was nothing else I could have done. I did everything that I could to be the best that I could be at that moment. And like my playground workout, it just meant getting a little bit creative. My philosophy of no regrets, it very quickly evolved into no regrets equals no excuses. As I just mentioned, being successful in achieving any kind of goal requires perspective, being faced with a problem or a setback and choosing to see it as a challenge. And then choosing to embrace that challenge as an opportunity instead of as an obstacle. An opportunity to be creative and think outside the box. An opportunity to push yourself and see how good you can really be. Chances are you are not the only one facing whatever it is you're facing. But my question to you is, will you be the one who gets stopped by it, or will you be the one who gets motivated by it? I have faced a number of challenges throughout my life. Some might say I'm a glutton for punishment, putting myself out there on the world stage to face potential criticism. One of the challenges that has woven its way throughout my entire athletic career has been doubt. Has been the doubt from naysayers. Now, fortunately for me, that doubt never came from my family. But it came from the media. It came from acquaintances, sometimes teammates, a couple of times coaches, and also from those hiding behind the veil of anonymity called social media. All people who were questioning whether or not my goals were realistic or not. All questioning and doubting my ability to achieve what I set out to achieve. And sometimes the doubt was subtle, just a look or a slide comment or, an eye roll. Sometimes the doubt was not so subtle. Like after our first day of competition at the Sochi Olympics when we were losing. We were defending Olympic champions, but we were losing by a lot. Okay, unlike a World Cup race, so a regular season race, where the results are determined based on the accumulated times of 2 heats on just one given day. Results at the Olympic Games or at World Championships for bobsledding are based on the accumulated times of 4 heats over 2 days. So after just our very first day of competition, just the first 2 heats, we were already down by 23/100ths of a second. Now, that may not sound like a lot to you because I used the word hundredths, but that's actually an eternity in the sport of bobsledding. Just to put it in perspective, in Torino, in my very first Olympic Games, after 4 heats down the track, which was a total distance of 5.7 kilometers, or 3.54 miles, my teammate and I, we missed standing on that Olympic podium by only 0.05 of a second. That's the time it takes for the single beat of a hummingbird's wing. That is how close a bobsled race can be. So after that very first day of competition, we were written off. We were no longer expected to win gold. There was even an article written in USA Today by Chris Chase that made any kind of a comeback sound impossible. Here's why the US women's bobsled team has basically already won gold. Yeah, poor Chris. Yeah, this is the point at which many people give up. If not outwardly quitting, at the very least, resigning themselves to just simply going through the motions. Why? Because their belief in the possibilities of achieving their desired outcome would have died, reflecting the disbelief and the doubt of everyone around them. And this happens all too often. People limiting their visions and their pursuits based on the limited visions of the people around them. Sure, golden results after day one, yeah, golden results seemed highly unlikely. But here's the thing. Highly unlikely does not mean impossible. So my teammate, Kaylee Humphries, and I, we showed up on day 2 for Sochi. We decided to focus on our own program, our own plan, focus on the things that were in our control, and also break that large deficit down into manageable pieces and just focus on one run at a time. And after that 3rd run, gold was actually in sight. Now, we were still losing, but not by as much. And back up at the start house at the top of the track between runs, having sensed the excitement of the coaching staff, while she was switching her shoes, Kaylee looked up at me and said, "I want to know what the time splits are." I said, "You don't need to know what the time splits are. It'll just serve as a distraction. You just need to know that we have cut the gap in half. We just need to do the same thing again. It's possible." I looked at her and I said, "It is possible." And it was. Now, we weren't the only ones written off at those Sochi Olympic Games. So I know this is just over 5 years ago, so I'm going to work on your memory a little bit. But how many of you remember our Canadian women's hockey team in the final against the US? Yes? Okay. Now, how many of you wrote off our Canadian women's hockey team in liars? Oh, we have an honest person there. Thank you very much. Okay, I didn't mean to call you all liars. I'll just pretend you don't remember. The final hockey game against our Canadian women and the US, we were losing 3-0 going into the 3rd period. Actually, we were losing 3-0 going into the last 5 minutes of the game, weren't we? 5 minutes. And then our girls came back to win it in overtime. Now, that was a pretty cool Olympic story. That game was being played the day after we won our bobsled race. So that was actually being played while we were receiving our Olympic gold medals on the podium. Now, what's really interesting is I want to tell you a little bit about what was happening behind the scenes. So after we won our race, we were up most of the night doing a lot of media. And again, the next morning, really early, we're back doing media. And at that point, the next morning, it's more like a divide and conquer. So Kaylee was in this room doing interviews. I was over here doing interviews. And so when I came out and emerged from a room post-interview, a gentleman approached me and he said, "Hi, Heather, my name is so-and-so. I do reporting mostly for hockey, but I just wanted to meet you. I thought you'd be really interested to hear this." I said, "Okay, nice to meet you." He said, "I just spoke with Caroline Ouellette, who was the captain of the women's hockey team at the time. And he said, I just wanted a soundbite. So I asked her what words of inspiration she said to her team the night before. And she said, "Oh, nothing." He said, "What do you mean nothing? Like, what did you do or say? Did you do anything? Or what did you do to pump them up?" She said, "Oh, nothing." And he was like, oh my gosh, like what? Well, what did you do last night? Did you do anything as a team? Like, how did you inspire them? And how did you? She goes, I didn't have to say anything. We just got together as a team in the athletes' lounge, and we watched our Canadian women's bobsled team come from behind and beat the Americans. Like, that was pretty cool. Okay, but it gets better. He then asked me if I wanted to write them a note. He said, I might have an interview I'm trying to get an interview with them later before their game. Did you want to send them a note? Now, normally I would not do that. Normally I would not send a note to someone unless I send them notes all the time. Because even if it is a positive note, some people may internalize that as extra pressure. You just don't know how someone's going to internalize. So normally I wouldn't do that. But this was a team. So often with team events, you know that the note is going to go to someone who can then decide whether or not it's appropriate to share that or not. So I wrote them a note. Girls, there are ups and downs in every race or game, but we are proof that if you keep believing in the possibilities, results can be golden. Own it. The ice is yours. Fight till the bitter end. So I sent that off with him, having no idea if it was ever going to reach the hands of someone in the hockey world or not. I actually got this photo off of Twitter 2 weeks later. But I later found out that Haley Wickenheiser actually read this note to the team before they stepped out onto the ice. And she actually taped it to the locker right by the door. Now, I'm not saying that's why they won or anything. But you never know. I'm just kidding. They won on their own, and they deserved it. But I do find it interesting where people find that extra little bit of inspiration. You know, what makes one person find the extra gear? What makes someone else dig a little deeper? What helps other people just shift their perspectives so they can suddenly see the possibilities that still exist within their circumstance, regardless of whatever it is they're facing? Words are powerful, and so are actions. And lucky for us, those are both things we get to choose. We get to choose that. We get to choose how we impact our colleagues, our neighbors, our family members by the choices we make, by how we choose to live our lives and how we choose to do our jobs. Now, you will never know the full extent or reach of your impact. It doesn't just stop with your patients. It stops with the people your patients interact with and who those people interact with. You will never know how far it goes because of what I refer to as the ripple effect of action. But you get to choose what kind of leader you want to be, what kind of role model you want to be. You get to choose what kind of ripple you want to put out into the world. Now, we live in a society right now that is very much focused on achievements. So it wouldn't be unheard of for someone to come up and ask you what accomplishments you are most proud of. Right? What accomplishments are you most proud of? But I want you to think about what choices you are most proud of. These are often the choices that were probably hard to make, probably took a lot of time and consideration, probably, or may have, involved a pros and cons list. These are often the choices that were hard to make because although you knew deep down that it was the right decision for you, that decision went against the expectations of others. For example, did any of you choose a university or even a career, perhaps, that your parents didn't approve of? No, a couple people. How about a spouse? More hands? Just kidding, it's just trust tree. We'll keep it in here. My decision, my choice to return to bobsledding for the Pyeongchang Olympic season, that was not an easy decision for me. In fact, it took an entire month of deliberation. It took an entire month of weighing the pros and cons, an entire month of going through all the different scenarios and figuring out what decision was right for me, what decision aligned with my values. You see, in March 2017, almost a full year before the Pyeongchang Olympic Games, my former teammate, Kaylee Humphries, with whom I had won gold in Vancouver and Sochi, she sent me a message asking if I would consider going back to bobsledding to try and three-peat with her in Pyeongchang. And I said no. And then in the spring, the coaches sent me a message, contacted me, and asked me if I would consider returning to bobsledding for the Pyeongchang Olympic season. And again, I said no. And those were easy decisions for me. Those were, in fact, very easy decisions for me. There was nothing that was motivating me to go back to competition. Since the Sochi Olympic Games, I had made it my life's work to empower other people. It wasn't about seeing how many more times I could win. It was about seeing if I could help others achieve their goals. So I created an entire business around helping other people achieve their goals. And then in August 2017, only 6 months before the Olympic Games, I received a message on Instagram from an up-and-coming driver, someone I'd never met before. And she explained in the message who she was and what her goals were. And she also explained how there was a lack of leadership in the program, how besides my former teammate, who had to focus on her own success, there was nobody else in the program who had been to the Olympic Games before. She was saying how the coaches and trainers were all telling her how stressful and so much pressure, unlike any other season, she would find in that Olympic season, and how often results are based on your mindset and your ability to manage all of the stresses and pressures. And she also said, based on what she'd heard about me, she thought that I would be an asset to not only her team, but the team as a whole. Now, for someone who had just written a book about not selling yourself short, and for shifting your perspective to see all the possibilities and opportunities that exist, I was pretty blown away to have had my own perspective shifted. I mean, she was asking for my experience of managing high-performance situations, high stressful situations in a high-performance environment. So her argument made me look at a return to bobsledding in a whole different way. It wasn't just about the push. It was about an impact I could make. So although I was not motivated at all by the idea of returning to competition just to try and win a third Olympic medal, I realized I was motivated by the idea of returning to help someone else get to the Olympics and potentially win their first. So I decided to go back. And that decision was challenged right up until race day. Right up until race day. Now, it wasn't my decision to return to competition that was challenged. It was my decision to return to only push a rookie, to only push someone who had never competed in the Olympic Games before. That was my decision. And it didn't sit well with people, with some people. Some people just couldn't understand why, even though I tested as the fastest brakeman on the team again, why I wouldn't want to do anything possible to get back in that Canada 1 sled again. People couldn't understand how I would knowingly forfeit the best opportunity to win another Olympic medal. Unfortunately, there will always be people out there who challenge your choices, who will question the goals that you set for yourself and doubt your abilities to achieve them. Even now, with everything I've accomplished, when people ask me about my goals and things that I have planned, I still hear words like lofty and ambitious. And I still get questions from people. Do you really think that's realistic? Do you really think you'll be able to achieve everything you've set out for yourself? My answer is pretty simple. I have no idea. But I sure as hell want to see how close I can get. Challenges are everywhere. Whether your goal is to make money or make an impact, grow your following or grow a garden, climb the corporate ladder or climb Mount Everest, whether your goal is to stand up on a podium or stand up for a cause, you will be faced with choices that challenge you. And achieving inner fulfillment, the feeling of success, instead of just an outward material success as defined by others, is about authentic decision-making, making the choices that are right for you despite being bombarded by the opinions and values and expectations of other people. Now, despite team expectations, I chose not to move to Calgary to train with the national bobsled team in a multi-million-dollar push-train facility. Now, athletes fly from all over the world to train in that facility. They pay to use it. And here I was, just forfeiting the opportunity to have that at my disposal. But I truly believed that training closer to home in a much less stressful, much less small p political environment was the best decision for me. I wanted to be reminded on a daily basis that there were things that were more important than sport. But I also knew that I was making things a bit harder for myself. And I didn't want my decision of training closer to home to also become an excuse for me not to train as hard as I needed to in order to achieve the things I really wanted to achieve. But I mean, here I was, passing up the opportunity to train in this world-class technology despite knowing it was really the best decision for me. But who's to say we don't have good technology here on the East Coast? Now, nobody can dispute that that is the exact position I need to be in order to push a sled. So every single time I saw on the schedule that my team was going to be pushing in the ice house, I found a car and a parking lot, and I pushed. Now, I do have to give a little shout out to my brother because he likes to tell people that he's helped with my Olympic training. I mean, granted, he did sit in the car while it was in neutral as I pushed him across the parking lot, blaring Eye of the Tiger out of the windows. Yeah. My definition of a leader is someone who lives their life in a way that inspires other people, in a way that inspires others to action, in a way that inspires others to become the best versions of themselves. It is not what you accomplish that makes you a leader. It is how you pursue it that inspires others. So I invite you to empower those around you by living an inspired life, by making the decisions that are right for you. And I invite you to be fueled and motivated by challenges like I am, to not put a limit on your potential, the potential you have in your ER, or the potential impact you have on others. In closing, although everyone could use a little bit of luck, I'm going to wish you courage. Courage to step outside of your comfort zone, which I'm sure happens daily in the ER. And, risk feeling a little bit exposed, like wearing full spandex in front of millions of people. I want to wish you perspective to constantly redefine what we've been told is realistic and to see all the possibilities that exist within your circumstance. I wish for you perseverance, resiliency, and creativity to think outside the box, to overcome the obstacles that will inevitably pop up along the way to achieving what it is you want to achieve. But most of all, I wish for you belief. I wish for you the profound belief that we are all capable of way more than we give ourselves credit for. Because although a goal may seem too big to some people, and an outcome may seem highly unlikely, believe me when I say it is still without a doubt very much possible. Thank you for having me. Enjoy the rest of your conference.